Hello, my name is Mike Herrera, and today I wanted to talk to you guys about the IBM Systems Director plugin available with version 7 clustering. If you're already familiar with our product line, you know that our product has been around for a number of years. We were originally called HACMP, and we're now called PowerHA System Mirror. In the chart, you see the transition going from HACMP to PowerHA at version 5.5. Version 6 was the last release that used the older underlying infrastructure. Once we bump up to version 7 clustering, we now sit in a cluster-aware AIX infrastructure. So version 7 clusters now provide a new administrative point of control by the means of IBM Systems Director. What you get are file sets on the actual client side that you can install on the HA nodes. They will basically load the agent that will let you communicate with IBM Systems Director, and then if you download the free plugin for IBM Systems Director and you basically get the nodes to handshake, you'll be able to perform the administration from the IBM Systems Director front end. So we had transition. In prior releases, we had WebSmith. WebSmith was available since version 5.2 of HACMP. In version 5.5, they allowed the ability to install just the client code on a separate AIX LPAR, not one of the cluster members, and you could leverage that server as a gateway server. In essence, you could register all of your available clusters, and then from there you could perform the administration. The backend to that gateway server was basically IBM HTTPD server or Apache. So clients had the choice to basically do their administration through a GUI, leveraging that gateway server front end starting in version 5.5. Version 6.1 had the same offering, and now starting with version 7, what we have is the 7.1 IBM Systems Director plugin, which again I already mentioned is free. It is supported on the newer versions of IBM Systems Director, and as you can see on the screen, it does give you the ability to manipulate and perform cluster operations and change the configuration around from the IBM Systems Director interface. Historically, we had IBM WebSmith. We went from the transition of having WebSmith installed on each individual cluster member, and then in version 5.5 it let us have that standalone WebSmith server. This is more or less what the front end looked like. You can see that it was a little bit simpler. On the left hand side, I was basically already clicked into one of the clusters. I had two nodes, Connor and Caitlin. This is showing the associations tab. You could perform operations by right-clicking on the resource groups on the left, move resources around, stop and start cluster services. If you wanted to get an enterprise view of all of your clusters, there's an enterprise tab on the top right. So it was a little bit simpler than what we have available today with IBM Systems Director. Now, when you install the version 7 cluster code, the agent will automatically be loaded as long as you installed the Director agent file set from the HACMP media. As long as you have the agent running and you have the plugin on the IBM Systems Director side, again, you'll basically have to do discovery of the system, collect the inventory, and IBM Systems Director, as long as you have the plugin, should be able to detect that the nodes are running PowerHA. It'll allow you to attach to one of the cluster members, that will be the controlling node, and be able to perform the operations from there, whether it's administrative type functions, to manipulate the resources, or just to simply see the status of your resources and the actual nodes. So here's basically just showing the screenshot of how you can dive in from within IBM Systems Director. The goal in this session is to go ahead and do a live demo of my existing environment where I manage multiple clusters. Version 7.1.2 of our product does have a bunch of additional enhancements. So we have a bunch of new wizards available that will provide assistance with the creation of the many types of resources that we can create. In this session, rather than getting on going into detail about each of the individual line items, I just wanted to go ahead and give you a reference chart that will show you the additional wizards and functionality that have been added. Version 7.1.2, the main thing that they actually introduce is the ability to work with an environment using the Enterprise Edition that version 7.1.2 brings into the mix. So now you can define sites and determine whether it's going to be a stretch cluster or a linked cluster, which are new concepts available in version 7.1.2. Here's the last screenshot that I was going to show as far as the PowerPoint is concerned. You can see a couple of different nodes. And up on the top you see the node specific to site 1, on the bottom you see the node specific to site 2. So these are some of the available enhancements available with the newest release of the HA code in version 7.1.2, playing with the newer releases of IBM Systems Director. Now if I go ahead and I log into one of our IBM Systems Director servers in the lab, if you're already familiar with the interface, you'll basically see that you get the ability to connect to all of the different plugins. So you have two ways of actually getting into PowerHA. On the right hand side you see the PowerHA System Mirror Management option. On the left hand side you'll see the Availability tab and PowerHA System Mirror. Both options will basically get you to the same place. Once you get used to this piece, you can basically get rid of the left pane. If you click into PowerHA System Mirror Management, you'll basically get to the main screen. Here I have a total of 3 clusters. I have 6 LPARs defined with version 7 clusters. I'll get into more detail about the configuration for each one of them and what the IBM Systems Director interface is actually showing. But on the left hand side you can see how it's detecting that 4 of those nodes are actually up and running, 2 of them are offline. On the right hand side you see how I have 3 resource groups that are shown to be okay. 4 of them are in an unknown state. As you'll see as I go through the presentation, you'll notice that the 4 additional resource groups happen to be member of one of the clusters that I currently have powered down. And then you have a couple of different options. If you wanted to create the cluster, you could do so from the cluster management option right here under Create Cluster. You could set up federated security, which I won't be doing in this particular talk. But manage clusters is typically the way that you would actually go in. On the bottom you see the Manage Resource Groups, which is a separate tab within the cluster. You see some of the additional wizards that you have available as far as assisting you with the initial configuration or deployment of one of the features within the cluster. So I'll go ahead and I'll click into Manage Clusters. And once I go in, I'll get to the initial view. On the left hand side you can see that I have 3 clusters currently defined to IBM Systems Director. All of these guys, in order for the IBM Systems Director interface to handshake with them, have to be running version 7 clustering. On a prior chart I showed that there are 3 different current releases of version 7. You have 7.10, 7.11, and 7.12. In my particular environment I have 7.11 running with Service Pack 4 and I have 7.12 running with Service Pack 1. So I have a combination of different 7.1 clusters. The one that's active, or the ones that are active, are showing up on the top, showing OK. You see the beta cluster 2. I have an SAP demo cluster. All these guys currently are active. On the bottom I happen to have an HA cluster. It is running version 7, even though I have it named as an HA61_ cluster, but currently I have those nodes powered down. If I go ahead and I click on the individual nodes, you'll basically see the information showing up in the General tab as far as the version of code that you're running. So in this instance I'm running version 7.12. If I go ahead and I click under the Resource Group tab, which is the other way to actually take a different view of your resources within IBM Systems Director, it'll take us just a second to load. And now you'll see the same distribution. You'll see the 3 different clusters that I had defined. So cluster 1, cluster 2, and cluster 3. Notice that the bottom one is currently not powered up, so the nodes are not online, and hence why my 4 resource groups were shown to be in an unknown state. My other clusters are currently showing up to be okay, and the resource groups are actually online. If I click on an individual resource group, in this instance one of my MUnited nodes, you'll see that it'll give me information in the General tab. Currently that resource group happens to be online on the MUnited node. These are the participating nodes. You see MUnited and the node Mutiny on the right hand side, and some additional attributes. You could do edits to some of the configuration options from within here. I could also come in and right click on the resource group and I could perform operations that I could do instead of from the command line or the SMIT panels. I could do them directly from the plugin. So I could bring the resource group offline. I could do an RG move from here, add resources, add additional storage. So basically shortcuts to some of the CSPOC operations that you can actually have access to. If I click on some of the additional tabs, you'll see that some of my resources are showing up under the Resources tab. If I click under Storage, you'll see that I have a volume group and file system option. Probably better suited for me to go into one of the clusters where I actually have resources defined. So let me go ahead and go to the second cluster, the SAP demo cluster. I will do the same thing. I'll go under the Resources tab and show you, hey, currently I have an application controller. I do have a custom monitor defined to monitor the status of that application, and I also have a highly available service IP address. Under the Storage tab, by default, it'll go ahead and pull up the view for the volume groups and file systems. So you see the different volume groups that I have and their type on the right-hand side. I could go ahead and perform actions from here, but I did want to go ahead and point out that there are other alternate views of things that you could actually do from here. So you could add volume groups. If I wanted to go ahead and pick on one of the individual volume groups, in this instance my Oracle volume group, I could come in, remove it, add, and perform operations to those resources. If I show you one of the alternate views, currently I have no available raw disks, no tape devices. I am not doing any type of replicated storage, hence the tab is going to be empty, and I know that I don't have any resource group dependencies also defined here. So the dependencies tab should be showing me nothing as well. So currently nothing showing up online. One of the other popular options that you have, if I go back to the clusters view and I go ahead and click on one of the cluster names, I'll go ahead and I'll click on my SAP demo cluster. There are different tabs altogether. So before I was in the resource group tab, now I'm back on the clusters tab. My general options will show you things like my currently active repository disk, the version of HA we already covered, the cluster multicast address, security level if I were to go ahead and have any type of encryption between the nodes, my heartbeat frequency, whether I have file collection set to run, and whether I have the automatic nightly verification set to go ahead and run at midnight by default. Additional tabs. So you'll have things like the cluster topology. You do get a message saying that you may have to run a refresh so that it actually populates the information. And here you see that you get a logical view of the cluster definitions. I don't find that to be as useful in a simple cluster like this, but you are limited to the interface and the options that IBM Systems Director lets you define. Here you see the Networks tab. I could go ahead and pull up attributes for the particular networks. Same types of things that I'm already seeing here, like my net mask on the right hand side. Other operations like cluster snapshots. I could take a view of any existing snapshots that I currently have. I could go ahead and create additional snapshots. Okay, if you had any custom snapshot methods, you could access them from here as well. Federated security. Again, I mentioned that I was not going to get into detail about this. I don't have any type of federated security options actually set up in this cluster. I'm not doing any type of RBAC or encrypted file system. As far as the reports and logs, again, pay attention to the view option on the top. So by default, it'll go ahead and take me to the actual reports. This is a config summary report, which is actually quite handy. It's kind of like a Cliff Note view of the cluster. I could right click on the cluster as well and get that config summary, or I could get to the option to go ahead and create a config summary and then have it saved off automatically. I'll click into that guy in just a minute, but I also wanted to highlight that you have access to the log files from Systems Director as well. I'll let that go ahead and populate. So the nice thing about the log files is that it'll actually show you the path of the logs in the event that you had redirected them to a different path. It would be nice to actually see them from this particular view. And it took it just a second to load. But here you see the various logs available. My default directory, var HACMP log. In some instances you'll see things like var HACMP CLCOMD. So various options available. I'll go back to the cluster report in just a second. I wanted to go ahead and populate. If you had any type of alerts defined, I do happen to have a notification event, a pager event that I basically have defined, where depending on the types of events that I actually have configured within my notify event, I get an email indicating that something happened within the cluster. Different event methods, event commands, or the events log. And then if I click under the other tab, just to show you the last available tab, you also have the ability to manipulate the file collections, your repository disks, and any custom verification methods that you may have actually defined. New with the repository disks is the ability to define backup repository disks. This is a future line item, so right now they've basically set up the foundation for it, but you'll have the ability to define multiple repository disks, and in the future, in the event that one or the active repository disk fails, it'll automatically go ahead and swap to one of the backup repository volumes. Today you can tag volumes as a backup repository disk, but it doesn't it only marks them internally within HA. It doesn't do anything to the disk, so from the outside you would just see it as a regular disk, and by default, if you wanted to go ahead and do a swap after the fact, you could manually go in through the HA panels or through IBM Systems Director and swap out that repository disk for another disk. Let me go ahead and go back to the actual cluster report, and for the sake of the recording, I'll try to keep things relatively short for this one. We may have future talks where we actually go into a lot more detail if needed, but for now I thought it might be useful to do an overview of the available administrative functions that IBM Systems Director provides for PowerHA. So I'm going to go ahead and back up to the reports view. I already had a report created from a prior configuration. I would probably want to go ahead and create a new one. Let me go back to the reports, and now that I'm here, let me go ahead and create an updated report, being that that one is actually from last year. So I could go ahead and call them cluster summary. I'd like to get an actual configuration summary, and this is my February 2013 report. I can go ahead and save it and view it. If you'll notice, it doesn't actually like spaces between the name, so let me go ahead and give it an underscore. And you will note that this operation does take a little bit of time. It's already beginning to populate the information, but every time that you go ahead and create a report, it'll literally connect to the controlling node and pull all of the cluster configuration information and sort it for you. This is a report that once you have saved off should load a lot faster, but if you're looking to go ahead and get something immediate as far as the cluster configuration, it's probably better suited that you actually log into the machine and invoke some of the commands. There's a multitude of different commands that you could run, like a cl dump, cl top info. You could take a look at a cluster snapshot. But the cluster configuration report is also a nice way to have a saved off report that you could quickly pull up, assuming that nothing had changed from the last time that you pulled it. And if you had a bunch of different clusters in your environment, you could bounce back and forth and take a look and see what the differences are between each of the cluster configs. You may have clusters that are more than 2 nodes. You may have completely different resources. You could pay attention to those differences, like the different IP addresses, the different volumes that are in use, the different volume groups and file systems, security settings that may be different from one to the next. So okay, and now that the actual cluster report has actually loaded, you can see that this is coming from a 712 cluster. Okay, at the top you basically see this is a 712 cluster, so it's showing that it's a cluster type stretched instead of a linked cluster. I'm only using the standard edition. I haven't modified any additional attributes as far as who the author and company are. Cluster security settings, I have not done any type of additional encryption to my cluster communication. You see my cluster sites and nodes. Currently I have no site definitions. I do have node names available, my network and available interfaces. I only have a single service IP label, so this is a relatively simple configuration and deployment. I have a single resource group called SAPRG. It's currently online. You see the different policies available for that resource group, and if I keep going down the attributes, the useful things would probably be things like the application start and stop script, that you can see any type of monitors that I may have defined. So you see the application monitors. I currently do have a long-running monitor for SAP, and then my volume groups are showing up here, the physical volumes that are currently in use. And if I keep going down, you see my different logical volumes on the bottom left. On the right hand side you see my mount points and volume groups affiliated with each of those mounts. If I go down a little bit further, you'll see any of my file collections that I currently have defined. I currently don't have file collections enabled, so it's showing the default collections that I could go ahead and actually turn on. And at the very bottom you see the current NFS exports that I have within the cluster. So all in all, it's a nice report that shows you a summary of all of the attributes defined to that cluster definition. It's a nice to have. You could flip back and forth if you had multiple reports and you just want to do a quick compare to identify what you had currently defined within a cluster. You could click on the different tabs and just go back and forth that way. Also, it does take a little bit of time to go ahead and create the report, but the nice thing is that once you have it saved off, if you go back to the prior tab, you could come in and click on the actual report. You see the one that I actually just created underneath, and it would be significantly faster to go ahead and load. Hopefully you found the short session useful. Let us know if you have any questions, and I hope to see you guys in a future